Hey, crew. It's Pitt, and I'm back with some more psychology. Today, we'll be diving back into the works of Carl Jung. We will be dealing with the concept of the Great Mother archetype. This is from the collected works. We will be reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people do find value in it. So you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the box down below so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. If you find value, I ask that you do all the wonderful things down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment. Whether you agree or disagree with anything that is stated, put it in the box, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you truly find value, hit me with that super chat or super thanks. Consider joining for a membership or picking up a copy of one of my books. The one most relevant to today's discussion will be The Green Stone, my work on spiritual alchemy, where I define some of the terminology in a better way, a little bit more concise. I consider it to be the completion of the Mysterium Conjunctionis from Carl Jung. We have read through that entirety, and that was the inspiration for the book. I also consider it to be the completion of the archetypes because I completely reworked the MBTI system into something that is a fairly accurate representation of the reflection of the binaries, right? And we discussed that in some detail. With all of that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of Carl Jung with on the concept of the archetype. This is the Great Mother. The concept of the Great Mother belongs to the field of comparative religion and embraces widely varying types of mother goddess. The concept itself is of no immediate concern to psychology because the image of a great mother in this form is rarely encountered in practice, and then only under very special conditions. The symbol is obviously a derivative of the mother archetype. If we venture to investigate the background of the great mother image from the standpoint of psychology, then the mother archetype, as the more inclusive of the two, must form the basis of our discussion. Though lengthy discussion of the concept of an archetype is hardly necessary at this stage, some preliminary marks of a general nature may not be out of place. In former times, despite some dissenting opinion and the influence of Aristotle, it was not too difficult to understand Plato's conception of the idea as supraordinate and pre existent to all phenomena. Archetype, far from being a modern term, was already in use before the time of St. Augustine and was synonymous with the idea of in the Platonic usage. All right, so we did this in the video yesterday. It'd be a little bit easier to do if you can see what I'm talking about. The easiest way to think about this, the archetype is a label that is placed on a set, right? It is placed on a group of things. It can be anything, right? You can put all kinds of things into groups. Set theory says that you can put anything into groups, and it's not necessarily the same for archetypes. Archetypes are more the groups of groups than it is the individual groups. In example, I've got a pair of glasses, right? This is a singular pair of glasses, and therefore it exists as a set of glasses in specificity, as specific glasses. If you take all of the glasses that is in existence and you put them together, that becomes a group that is glasses with no specificity, as an amorphous potentiality to be any type of glasses at all, but all having basically the same structure and function, right? They have lenses, they have a frame, they help you to see better or shield your eyes in some way. They are glasses as an enabler tool for the eyes. And that is a group. Whenever you clearly define the specifics of the group, I wanted to have this shape lenses, it ceases to be part of the glasses group as the unspecified. It's still there, but then it becomes the specific group of these glasses. The archetypes are glasses as opposed to these glasses. The individual pieces fit into it but it doesn't really fit into the smaller sections. It is part of the larger group that is existence, right? The primary group that is the number one set is existence. It is a one. It is all things at the exact same time with no differentiation, even relatively. The second set from that is the binary, and it's this group or that group. It is positive or negative. It is masculine or feminine, but it is a subset of the group of existence, right? If it is positive, it is only a part of existence. And if it is negative, it is only a part of existence. But existence encompasses all of positive and negative. These subsets of groups, right? Not the primary one, but every group underneath that is the archetype. Everything that fits into the archetype is a subset of the archetype, but it cannot be the archetype itself, right? There can be like a subset archetype of masculine is hero. I mean, that is a subset and it is considered an archetype, but it's really just a subset of another archetype. It all flows from the one archetype of existence into differentiation through the binary of positive, negative, masculine, feminine, creative, destructive, stasis, and change, right? Those are the major elements that are involved. And so when we see archetype, that's what we should think of is the group, right? It is the highest level group just under existence of this particular thing, right? Glasses is a particular thing, but it's not a specified particular thing like these glasses would be, as opposed to any potential glasses whatsoever, right? The subset is existence. Positive is any potential positive ever. And then any positive that comes from that is part of positive archetype. Hopefully that was a little bit clear. Now, Plato was the exact same thing, right? Now, when he was talking about the idea in the idealized, right, that is glasses as the group, but perfect, right? That's the only real differentiation. It doesn't have to be perfect. That was his way of viewing it, right? Because it is the subset of all glasses. It is therefore the perfect set of glasses and all the little reflections, right? The individual specific glasses, those are just going to be reflections of the idealized glasses. But he's talking about the same thing, right? The archetype is the group, the idealized is just the perfect group. And hopefully that's not too confusing. All right, let's get back to the text. When the Corpus Hermeticum, which probably dates from the 3rd century, describes God as the archetypal light, it expresses the idea that he is the prototype of all light, that it is to say, pre existent and supraordinate to the phenomena light. Were I a philosopher, I should continue in this Platonic strain and say, somewhere in a place beyond the skies, there is a prototype or primordial image of the mother that is pre existent and supraordinate to all the phenomena in which the maternal, in the broadest sense of the term, is manifest. And this is the same thing that I was just saying, right? He's placed a little bit differently, right? The Platonic strain is to say there is a prototype or primordial image pre-existent that is the perfect, right? That's the only real difference between the label archetype and the label idealized. But I am an empiricist, not a philosopher. I cannot let myself presuppose that my peculiar temperament, my own attitude to intellectual problems, is universally valid. Apparently, this is an assumption in which only the philosophers may indulge, who always takes it for granted that his own disposition and attitude are universal and will not recognize the fact, if he can avoid it, that his personal equation conditions his philosophy. Now, see, I don't suffer from that. I mean, uh, I do believe that it could be applied universally, but there are a wide variety of things that could be applied universally, right? There is the absolute truths, right? There are some absolute truths, and you can live in denial of those truths, but it's just really denial, right? God exists. It's outside of the creation. That is something that I fully and firmly believe is a truth, but you don't have to. Many people don't. But there is more reason to believe that God exists as the undifferentiated. Everybody can do God as opposed to the differentiated versions of God that we have. Then there is to believe that there was no design into creation whatsoever. Uh, and so while I believe emphatically that there is God, I can fully recognize that people do not, right? And even that may be their path. Now, it is my understanding that that is their path from God. And so consider that a rationalization, absolutely. Right? But I'm open about it, right? I don't try and deny the fact that other people think differently than I do. And almost without exception, that is okay. Right? There is exceptions, right? It is not okay to kill someone, right? Now, that is murder as opposed to self-defense, right? You are always able to defend yourself up to and including the taking of a life. But you should never set out with intentionality to end someone else's life or do so except through self-defense. And so that is empirically bad. I mean, there is justifications in wars. We're not going to get into that equivocation yet, but there are empirical bads, right? And you can be in opposition to me on a fundamental moral level where I cannot like accept that your way is a valid way, right? You can be a murderer, unrepentant, and I will never accept that that is a valid way. But if you believe in Muhammad, that's fine, right? Or Allah through Muhammad, that's fine. If you believe in Judaism, that's fine. If you are a Christian, that's fine. Your understanding of the divine and my understanding of the divine don't have to coincide as long as we can agree that there is a divine, right? Now, I don't believe that he is there to punish you. I don't believe that he is there to make you suffer or to keep you in a prison. I don't believe he created you to be in a prison. I believe we're here for experiences, and sometimes the experiences suck. I mean, but that doesn't make them less valid of an experience. It doesn't make that an evil thing. Your actions can be evil, right? And so I don't say that my way is the only way. I don't say that my understanding is the only understanding. I do believe that there are incorrect understandings, but there are wide multitudes of ways that God will meet you. And he will come to meet you where you are. You don't have to go to him. He is there with you all of the time. And so I cannot say that most people's way is not the right way, right? I cannot say that your way is not the right way. I can say it's not the right way for me. I can give you my reasons for not following those ways, and I have. And so my understanding and your understanding don't have to be the same as long as we can agree on basics of humanity, right? We should be kind. We should act as if we all are a same species. We should all be moderate in our consumptions. We should be generous in our efforts. We should be appropriate with our speech. We should be timely with our actions. We should be faithful in what we do, and we should be on purpose with our lives. Those are my core beliefs, and they match fairly well with all of the religions when they are practiced without the evil things that humans have thrown into them. And so, if you are genuinely seeking God, I'm never going to say you're doing it wrong, right? I can say that you're not doing it the way that I would do it, but that's okay. And I will only really tell you that if you're watching me on the TV or if you ask me. And so that was a bit of a rant, right? But this is an attitude, right? And this is an attitude that's not entirely invalid, but it's not entirely universal either. Because I like to think of myself as at least a semi empiricist, right? I understand that many of my understandings come entirely from subjective things. And I am open and honest about that too. And I tell you often, right? This is a subjective thing. This is something that I experience, and I cannot give you my experience. I can only relay it. You can take it, you can leave it. Take it with a grain of salt, put it to the test, see what the fruits will be. I mean, all of that. And so I do consider myself to be an empiricist who is seeking the spiritual, right? And by necessity, Sometimes the evidence of the spiritual will not be empirical. I will never be able to prove to you that I had a vision. Right? I will never be able to prove to you that I was miraculously healed. I will never be able to prove those things to you. And so I don't try. I relate to you that these things have happened. I tell you about them. I tell you how they happened and how you can possibly reproduce them so that you can put them to the test and see if it works. And I think that at least makes me a partial empiricist. And as an empiricist, I must point out that there is a temperament which regards ideas as real entities and not merely as nomnia. Now, this is the egregore thing, right? The concept of as a overwhelming, right? That we have it is forces of ideas coming into conflict. And we could use today's political environment, but let's take it back 100 years or so. And so we had a spirit of enslavement and we had a spirit of abolishment. And these two were forces. And as forces, they could be regarded as entities, right? They take on a life of themselves. They live above and beyond the individuals who are involved. They involve many individuals, and that is generally speaking one of the keys to it becoming a thing. But it is almost as if there were a tangible substance that is created from this. It's not really tangible, right? This is some of that non-empiricist information, but it is a feeling. It is an oppressiveness. It is a longing for that overwhelms, and it becomes polarizing to the point where something has to give. It becomes so much in the binary that the moderation and the mediation between is no longer possible. And instead, you have sudden static discharge, much like lightning or a war, right? These tensions are normal. They happen continuously. There is somewhat of a cycle that we could trace, right? Strong man, weak man. And so it is not absolutely inconceivable that the current situation is an iteration of that, right? I am not a doomsayer. I believe that we are on the upflow of that. But in order to get to the upflow of the Civil War, a lot of people died. And a lot of people made a stand, good or bad, positive or negative, whatever it was. You had an agent of stasis in the Confederacy, and you had an agent of change in the Union. And they were both representatives of the other as well. The Union was a representative of stasis, right? Continue the Union. And the Confederacy was the agent of change. And as representing both of those in such measure, there had to be conflict. There had to be an energetic discharge. There had to be something. Now, that could have taken place through discourse, but men are fallible. And so, as fallible beings, we will tend to not do the correct thing. And we will tend to choose the easy thing over the hard thing. And it is much harder to make peace through talk and understandings than it is to do it through physical violence. It is much easier to express yourself with the primal urge of destroy this other person than it is to say, hey, we disagree on a lot of things. Let's see if we can find some commonality and to sit down and discuss it. And maybe it is irreconcilable. Sometimes there does have to be a change in situation, physically as well as emotionally, physically as well as spiritually. But these ideas, right, they take on their own life. The idea of we have to keep our way of life, or else everything is going to fall apart, became an idea that consumed the entirety of the area. And the other idea was, no, we can't. The real idea was we can't let them do this, but we'll go ahead and say that it was we need to abolish these slaves, right? That is what it kind of became towards the end, but it really was not the primary motivation for the war. I know that's going to set somebody off, and we can have a very long discussion about that, right? Slavery was an abomination. It should not have ever existed. It should never have been justified by any deity, right? That is a major problem. Back to the idea. These are ideas that take on a life of their own, and some people call it an egregore, right? That came up in conversation in the video yesterday. This is what it's talking about, right? Uh, real entity. It's not a real entity, but it is considered as a real entity, right? Oh, and it might be. There may actually be an entity of war that resides in a place where war is fomenting. There may be multiple iterations of that, right? It may be one for each one of the devices. It may be one for, each one of each nation. It might be one for each person. It might be one for each state. We don't know how those things are done. And all of that is speculation. Right. Let's get back to the text. It so happens, by the merest accident, one might say, that for the past 200 years, we have been living in an age in which it has become unpopular or even unintelligible to suppose that ideas could be anything but nomina. Anyone who continues to think, as Plato did, must pay for his anachronism by seeing the supra-celestial, an example metaphysical, essence of the idea relegated to the universal, unverifiable realm of faith and superstition, or charitably left to the poet. Once again, in the age-old controversy over universals, the nominalistic standpoint has triumphed over the realistic, and the idea has evaporated into a mere flatus vocis. This change was accompanied, and indeed to a considerable degree caused, by the marked rise of empiricism, the advantages of which were only too obvious to the intellect. Since that time, the idea the idea is no longer something a priori, but is secondary and derived. Naturally, the new nominalism promptly claimed universal validity for itself, in spite of the fact that it too is based on a definite and limited thesis colored by temperament. This thesis runs as follows: we accept as valid anything that comes from outside and can be verified. The ideal instance is verification by experiment. The antithesis is we accept as valid anything that comes from inside and cannot be verified. The hopelessness of this position is obvious. The Greek natural philosophy, with its interest in matter, together with Aristotelian reasoning, has achieved a belated but overwhelming victory over Plato. Huh. Yet, every victory contains the germ of future defeat. In our own day, signs foreshadowing a change of attitude are rapidly increasing. Significantly enough, it is Kant's doctrine of categories, more than anything else, that destroys in embryo every attempt to revive metaphysics in the old sense of the word, but at the same time, paves the way for a rebirth of the Platonic spirit. It should be, if it be true, then there can be no metaphysics transcending human reason. It is no less true that there can be no empirical knowledge that is not already caught and limited by the a priori structure of cognition. During the century and a half that have elapsed since the appearance of the Critique of Pure Raison, the conviction has gradually gained ground that thinking, understanding, and reasoning cannot be regarded as independent processes subject only to the eternal laws of logic, but that they are psychic functions coordinated with the personality and subordinate to it. We no longer ask, has this or that been seen, heard, handled, weighed, counted, thought, and found to be logical? Instead, we ask, who saw, heard, or thought? Beginning with the personal equation in the observation and measurement of the minimal processes. This critical attitude has gone on to the creation of an empirical psychology, such as no time before ours is known. Today, we are convinced that all fields of knowledge, psychological premises exist which exert a decisive influence upon the choice of material, the method of investigation, the nature of the conclusions, and the formulation of hypotheses and theories. We have even come to believe that Kant's personality was a decisive conditioning factor of his critique of pure reason. Not only our philosophers, but our own predilections in philosophy, and even what we are fond of calling our best truths, are affected, if not dangerously undermined, by this recognition of a personal premise all creative freedom, we cry out, is taken away from us. What? Can it be possible that a man only thinks or says or does what he himself is? Sorry. Provided that we do not again exaggerate and so fall a victim to unrestrained psychologizing, it seems to me that the critical standpoint here is defined as inescapable. It constitutes the essence, origin, and method of modern psychology. There is an a priori factor in all human activities, namely the inborn, preconscious, and unconscious individual structure of the psyche. The preconscious psyche, for example, that of a newborn infant, is not an empty vessel into which, under favorable conditions, practically anything can be poured. On the contrary, it is a tremendously complicated, sharply defined individual entity which appears indeterminate to us only because we cannot see it directly. But the moment the first visible manifestations of psychic life begin to appear, one would have to be blind not to recognize their individual character. That is, the unique personality behind them. And that is an absolute truth, right? Like if you've ever been around kids, then you know the kids act differently. But that is true all the way down to infancy, right? Some kids sleep through the night really quickly, and some kids don't. Some kids are fussy, and some kids aren't. Some kids need more attention than others, and that is on a functional, foundational level. I mean, that is an observable trait that you can see inside of them, and it plays into the things that I talk about with the MBTI. Right? That is some of the first binaries being set. Right? How are you going to react when you feel discomfort? Are you going to cry or you're not? Right? These are binaries that are being set for your unconscious to run off of when you are an infant. Right? How did your parents respond whenever you made the sounds? Right into your unconscious, how you expect that to happen there going forward. And that is like the foundationals. And again, I say all the way up to the age of 8. He thinks it's about age 5, and that's understandable. I believe it's around 8. I believe pretty much all of the pattern is set fairly solidly, right? By 5, you can do pretty close to do a MBTI determination. By 8, you really can, right? And that's action based. That's not, the workplace crap that they do. It's the system that I use, not the one that's out there for everybody else. And so it's out there for everybody else. Nobody else knows about it. That's the thing. Uh, but it really does break down into the binaries, right? How you see the world breaks down into binaries. It is hardly possible to suppose that all these details come into being only at the moment in which they appear. When it is a case of morbid predispositions already present in the parents, we infer heredity transmission through the germ plasm. It would not occur to us to regard epilepsy in the child of an epileptic mother as an unaccountable mutation. Again, we explain by heredity the gifts and talents which can be traced back through whole generations. We explain in the same way the reappearance of complicated instinctive actions in animals that have never set eyes on their parents and therefore could not possibly have been taught by them. Right? And that is like they did experiments with nature versus nurture, and it's really wild how similar, right? Some of those experiments were pretty psychologically terrible, right? Like breaking apart the triplets, they lived in separate places, but they would choose things that were similar to each other with no idea that the other ones existed, right? Something intrinsic to them was just naturally drawn in that way. Nowadays, we have to start with the hypotheses that, so far as predisposition is concerned, there is no essential difference between man and all other creatures. Like every animal, he possesses a preformed psyche, which breeds true to his species, and which, on closer examination, reveals distinct features traceable to family antecedents. We have not the slightest reason to suppose that there are certain human activities or functions that can be exempted from this rule. We are unable to form any idea of what those dispositions or aptitudes are, which make instinctive actions in animals possible. And it is just as impossible for us to know the nature of the preconscious psychic disposition that enables a child to react in a human manner. We can only suppose that his behavior results from patterns of functioning, which I have described as images. The term image is intended to express not only the form of the activity taking place, but the typical situation in which the activity is released. These images are primordial images insofar as they are peculiar to the whole species. And if they ever originated, their origin must have coincided, at least, with the beginning of the species. They are the human quality of the human being, the specifically human form his activities take. This specific form is hereditary and is already present in the germ plasm. The idea that it is not inherited but comes into being in every child anew would be just as preposterous as the primitive belief that the sun which rises in the morning is a different sun from that which set the evening before. Right. And this is talking about DNA before they knew what DNA was. Right. The underlying genetics that form who you are. Not in some ways, it even forms how you act. Right. Those predispositions towards things that we were just discussing with the twin or the triplets. Right. You have genetic predispositions as well, right? There are certain things that you like to eat that other people really don't. Like the cilantro soap thing, that's real, right? That is a genetic predisposition towards you either can eat cilantro or it tastes like soap, right? And so there are things that are genetically coded into you. Now, if you consider that the superconscious, the earth element, and the DNA are the same, right? And then the expression of that would be the subconscious, right? It is written into your instincts, these particular things. Your and so that is like the DNA forming the body, right? The body is the record of what has happened. Uh, and so the setting the parameters of you, your sense of taste would be set specifically for you then. It does change every 7 to 8 years, but uh, these things are said fairly well whenever you are created, right? Whenever the individual, the ovum and sperm meet and join and create the flash of light that becomes a human being, those things are beginning to be encoded already into the flesh. And so that is writing your subconscious, right? Your superconscious writes the subconscious, and that is the binaries, right? That is the individual yes nos. Then the interpretation of that, the way that you take those instinctual reactions and change them, right? When you are faced with this situation, you either react in the instinctual way or you overcome the instinctual way. Some of those may be good, some of those may be bad. Neither one is intrinsically either. And you either write into your unconscious, I want to overcome the instinct or I want to continue the instinct. But the unconscious is the operating system. It is where you make those decisions and then it gets translated from the unconscious back into the subconscious and then hopefully written into the superconscious. You do that from the deciding agent, which is you. And so, yeah, this is DNA. Since everything psychic is preformed, this must also be true of the individual functions, especially those which derive directly from the unconscious predisposition. The most important of those is creative fantasy. In the products of fantasy, the primordial images are made visible, and it is here that the concept of the archetype finds its specific application. I do not claim to have been the first to point out this fact. The honor belongs to Plato, the first investigator in the field of ethnology to draw attention to the widespread occurrence of certain elementary ideas was Adolf Bastian. Two later investigators, Hubert and Moss, followers of Durkheim, speak of categories of the imagination. It was no less an authority than Hermann Usner, who first recognized unconscious preformation under the guise of unconscious thinking. If I have any share in these discoveries, it consists in having shown that archetypes are not disseminated only by tradition, language, and migration, but that they can re-rise re-arise spontaneously at any time, at any place, and without any in the outside influence. Right. Yeah. Um, there was something I was thinking about saying about that, and I was going to wait till the end. Oh, the functions here, right? The individual function, and it's talking about fantasy, right? The primary differentiation in the way that I do MBTI and the way that everybody else does MBTI breaks down into the binary functions, right? The primary, this is an existence, this is a human, and then from there, the further is what is your primary focus, right? It is either things or ideas. Right now, there is another way of looking at that, and this particular study is making that better, right? And it is this, right? It is materiality, right? The corporeal, the physicality, or the fantasy, the speculation, the seeing forward in time, right? That is the breakdown. That is the binary. Are you concerned with the real, empirical, or are you concerned with the fantastical, possible? That is the first binary in the system that I use. And here it is being discussed, right? That is what this is. This differentiation right here between fantasy and non fantasy is things and ideas. It is the first differentiation, the first question that I try to get answered, right? The next one is new or old, right? Positive or negative, stasis or change. And then from there, you go to thinking or who is it for, right? Self or tribe, positive or negative, right? Or negative or positive, because self would be the negative, tribe would be the positive, right? Giving away, keeping for yourself. And then you go into thinking and feeling. What do you get from that, right? Are you moving with others or are you staying the same? Stasis or change, quite literally. And then the last one, the final one, is direct and informative. How do you give the information? Do you reserve it for yourself in a negative manner? Do you expend it towards others in a positive manner? It is the five binaries of differentiation that I have been able to discover. There may be more, I will grant that, but these let you break down into the archetype of subgroup, right? The subgroup of ESFJ, the subgroup of INFJ, the subgroup of, which has its own subgroup of positive and negative, right? Direct and informative is the positive and negative matrix of the archetype of the INFJ, which is a subgroup of, you know, people. And so the way that it breaks down is really five binary questions that play directly into the five axes of existence. I really do feel like I'm onto something with that. The far reaching implications of this statement must not be overlooked, for it means that there are present in every psyche forms which are unconscious but nonetheless active, living dispositions, ideas in the Platonic sense, that preform and continually influence our thoughts and feelings and actions. Again and again, I encounter the mistaken notion that an archetype is determined in regard to its content. In other words, that it is a kind of unconscious idea, if such an expression be admissible. It is necessary to point out once more that archetypes are not determined as regards their content, but only as regards their form, and then only to a very limited degree. That's why we open this with the discussion about the archetype. A primordial image is determined as to its content only when it has become conscious and is therefore filled out with the material of conscious experience. Its form, however, as I have explained elsewhere, might perhaps be compared to the axial system of a crystal. Yes, yes, exactly. Might be compared to the axial system of a crystal, which, as it were, preforms the crystalline structure in the mother liquid, although it has no material existence of its own. I have a section discussing crystals in the first book. The classification system on that is an important thing. It really is. The first appears according to the specific way in which the ions and molecules aggregate. The archetype in itself is empty and purely formal, nothing but a facultas preformandi, a possibility of representation which is given a priori. The representations themselves are not inherited, only the forms, and in that respect, they correspond in every way to the instincts, which are also determined in form only. The existence of the instincts can no more be proved than the existence of the archetypes, so long as they do not manifest themselves concretely. With regard to the definiteness of the form, our comparison with the crystal is illuminating, inasmuch as the axial system determines only the stereometric structure, but not the concrete form of the individual's crystal. That is not true. Crystals are defined by the axial system, right? It is defined by either faces or edges, right? There is two ways of defining it, but it is either the axis of the edge or it is the axis of the face. Both of them require symmetry to acquire the next level of uh, realness, right? You have amorphous all the way at the bottom, which is no clear, definite structure. And then all the way at the top, you have gold, you have diamonds, you have silver, the really incorruptibles, right? But they have a perfect eight-sided structure, right? There is variation within that, that is true, but the variations are imperfections, right? That is what makes it less valuable. It is the very definition of what a crystal is defined by the axial system. Right? Like the only difference between quartz and what is it, quartz and ruby is the crystalline structure of the material. It's literally the same material, right? Like I think rose quartz or one of those that has the exact same chemical composition. It just cooled at a different rate. And therefore, the axial system defines what it finally became. This may be either large or small, and may vary endlessly by reason of the different size of its planes or the growing together of two crystals. The only thing that remains constant is the axial system, or rather, the invariable geometric proportions underlying it. The same is true of the archetype. Okay, I see what he was saying, right? Okay. In principle, it can be named and has an invariable nucleus of meaning, but always only in the principle, never as regards its concrete manifestation. In the same way, the specific appearance of the mother image at any given time cannot be deduced from the mother archetype alone, but depend on innumerable other factors. Good morning, brother. How's it going? Part two, the mother archetype. Like any other archetype, the mother archetype appears under an almost infinite variety of aspects. I mentioned here only some of the more characteristic. And again, right, like every one of the individuals is going to be a subset, right? You have the general classification of mother, right? But everything that is a good mother, bad mother, protective mother, overbearing mother, any of those is just going to be a subset of mother. And so there is an infinite variety contained within the category of mother. They are individual categories of bad mother, which is then individually characterized by the traits that they have, right? First in importance are the personal mother and grandmother, stepmother and mother in law. Then any woman with whom a relationship exists. For example, a nurse or governess, or perhaps a more remote ancestress. Then there are what might be termed mothers in a figurative sense. To this category belongs the goddesses, especially the Mother of God, the Virgin, and Sophia. Mythology offers many variations of the mother archetype, as, for instance, the mother who reappears as the maiden in the myth of Demeter and Kor, or the mother who is also the beloved, as in the Sybaris myth. Other symbols of the mother in a figurative sense appear in things representing the goal of our longing for redemption, such as paradise, the kingdom of God, the heavenly Jerusalem. Many things arousing devotion or feelings of awe, as for instance the church, university, city, or country, heaven, earth, the woods, the sea, or any still waters, matter, even, the underworld, and the moon can be mother symbols. Yeah, they can. The archetype is often associated with things and places standing for fertility and fruitfulness. the cornucopia, the plowed field, a garden. It can be attached to a rock, a cave, a tree, a spring, a deep well, or to various vessels, such as the baptismal font, or to the vessel shaped flowers like the rose or the lotus. Because of the protection it implies, the magic circle or mandala can be a form of mother archetype. Hollow objects such as ovens and cooking vessels are associated with the mother archetype, and, of course, the uterus, yoni, and anything of a like shape. Added to this list, there are many animals, such as the cow, hare, and helpful animals in general. All of these symbols can have a positive, favorable meaning or a negative, evil meaning. The ambivalent aspect is seen in the goddesses of fate, Mora, Grey, or Norns. Evil symbols are a witch, the dragon, or any devouring and entwining animal, such as a large fish or a serpent. The grave, the sarcophagus, deep water, death, nightmares, and bogies. Impusa, Lilith, etc. This list is not, of course, complete. It presents only the most important features of the mother archetype. The qualities associated with it are maternal solicitude and sympathy, the magic authority of the female, the wisdom and spiritual exaltation that transcend reason, any helpful instinct or impulse, all that is benign, all that cherishes and sustains, that fosters growth and fertility. The place of magic transformation and rebirth, together with the underworld and its inhabitants, are presided over by the mother. On the negative side, the mother archetype may connote anything secret, hidden, dark, the abyss, the world of the dead, anything that devours, seduces, and poisons, that is terrifying and inescapable, like fate. All these attributes of the mother archetype have been fully described and documented in my book, Symbols of Transformation. There, I formulated the ambivalence of these attitudes as the loving and terrible mother. Perhaps the historical example of the dual nature of the mother most familiar to us is the Virgin Mary, who is not only the Lord's mother, but also, according to the medieval allegories, his cross. In India, the loving and terrible mother is the paradoxical Kali. Sankhya philosophy has elaborated the mother archetype into the concept of prakriti, matter, and assigned to it the three gunas, or fundamental attributes: sattva, raja, and tamas, goodness, passion, and darkness. These are three essential aspects of the mother: her cherishing and nourishing goodness, her orgiastic emotionality, and her Stygian depths. The special feature of the philosophical myth, which shows Prakriti dancing before Purusha in order to remind him of discriminating knowledge, does not belong to the mother archetype, but to the archetype of the anima, which in a man's psychology invariably appears, at first, mingled with the mother image. Now, the anima is the spirit, and the spirit does have feminine aspects. Although the figure of the mother, as it appears in folklore, is more or less universal, this image changes markedly when it appears in the individual psyche. In treating patients, one is at first impressed and indeed arrested by the apparent significance of the personal mother. This figure of the personal mother looms so large in all personalistic psychologies that, as we know, they never got beyond it, even in theory. Two other important ideological factors. My own view differs from that of other medico psychological theories, principally in that I attribute to the personal mother only a limited ideological significance. That is to say, all those influences which the literature describes as being exerted on the children do not come from the mother herself, but rather from the archetype projected upon her, which gives her a mythological background and invests her with authority and numinosity. The ideological and traumatic effects produced by the mother must be divided into two groups. One, those corresponding to traits of character and attitudes actually present in the mother, and two, those referring to traits which the mother only seems to possess, the reality being composed of more or less fantastic, in example, archetypal, projections on the part of the child. Freud himself had already seen that the real ideology of neuroses does not lie in traumatic effects, as he first suspected, but in a peculiar development of infantile fantasy. This is not to deny that such a development can be traced back to disturbing influences emanating from the mother. I myself make it a rule to look first for the cause of infantile neuroses in the mother, as I know from experience that a child is much more likely to develop normally than neurotically, and that in the great majority of cases, definite causes of disturbances can be found in the parents, especially in the mother. The contents of the child's abnormal fantasies can be referred to the personal mother only in part, since they often contain clear and unmistakable allusions which could not possibly have reference to human beings. This is especially true where definitely mythological products are concerned, as is frequently the case in infantile phobias, where the mother may appear as a wild beast, a witch, a specter, an ogre, a hermaphrodite, and so on. It must always be borne in mind, however, that such fantasies are not always of unmistakably mythological origin, and even if they are, they may not always be rooted in the unconscious archetype, but may have been occasioned by fairy tales or accidental remarks. A thorough investigation is therefore indicated in each case. For practical reasons, such an investigation cannot be made so readily with children as with adults, who almost invariably transfer their fantasies to the physician during treatment. Or, to be more precise, the fantasies are projected upon him automatically. When that happens, nothing is gained by brushing them aside as ridiculous, for archetypes are among the inalienable assets of every psyche. They form the treasure in the realm of shadowy thoughts, of which Kant spoke, and of which we have ample evidence in the countless treasures motifs of mythology. I This has really hit me because if you don't know, I came from an abusive childhood, right? And so what this is striking me as is that this is not necessarily the mother itself, right? But the expectation on an intrinsic level of what a mother should be. I mean, you are projecting upon the actual mother the expectations of the perfect mother through a genetic understanding. Right? That's what he's talking about here. That it is genetically encoded on you to automatically understand this is what a mother should be. This is what a father should be. And the deviations are the reason for the disturbances, right? Because a mother should love her child unconditionally, right? With the exceptions that they are their own individual unit and they should be allowed to develop as such. It is an intrinsic understanding on the genetic level that this person should act this way. And when they don't, that is causing the neuroses. That is what is causing the problems. And that is a very interesting way of looking at it. I don't know that I've ever considered it in that direction, right? Archetypical self access system. Yeah. Like, I don't know that I've ever considered it from that particular viewpoint, right? And so that's just striking me as I never considered it being a genetic disposition for the archetype. And that is a brand new thought to me, like right now, and that is interesting. Like I even had the idea that you do get wrote into your DNA certain encodings, right? The taste thing and the individual stack that I like to use in my MBTI systems, and so that's really interesting. Really interesting. That explains a good bit of things, actually. The archetype is in no sense just an annoying prejudice. It becomes so because because the body is written from the DNA, and the DNA is the superconscious, which is the collective unconscious. So what is being pulled is the collective, right? It is being pulled into the creation of you from the collective to help encode the direction for you. And yeah, so yeah, Edward Edinger's ego and archetype. Interesting, interesting. I'm gonna pop that up so that if I do a watch back, and if I remember to do a watch back, I'll remember to look that up. All right. An archetype is in no sense just an annoying prejudice. It becomes so only when it is in the wrong place. In themselves, archetypal images are among the highest values of the human psyche. They have peopled the heavens of all races from time immemorial. Because, like, here we go. Like, one of my other fundamental understandings, and Jason from Green Forest helped me understand this, right? The laws are written on your heart. Like, you already know intrinsically what is right and wrong. You know intrinsically that you don't want somebody to be mean to you, so you shouldn't be mean to others. You don't want somebody to steal from you, so you shouldn't steal from others. You don't want somebody to cheat on you, so you shouldn't cheat on others, right? It is an intrinsic understanding that you get through your feelings, and that is too is encoded on you, right? You are born with that knowledge. You can deny it, you can distort it, but you have it, right? You can have the exact wrong response to it, but you have it intrinsic to you, created with you. And so, yeah, like that is just bringing together a whole lot of pieces in rapid fire right now. To discard them as valueless would be a distinct loss. Our task is not therefore to deny the archetype, but to dissolve the projections. Yeah, that makes so much sense. In order to restore their contents to the individual who has involuntarily lost them by projecting them outside himself. 3. The mother complex. The mother archetype forms the foundation of the so called mother complex. It is an open question whether a mother complex can develop without the mother having taken part in its formation as a demonstrable causal factor. My own experience leads me to believe that the mother always plays an active part in the origin of the disturbance, especially in infantile neuroses or in neuroses whose ideology undoubtedly dates back to early childhood. In any event, the child's instincts are disturbed, and this constellates archetypes, which, in their turn, produce fantasies that come between the child and its mother as an alien and often frightening element. Thus, if the children of an overanxious mother regularly dreams that she is a terrifying animal or a witch, these experiences point to a split in the child psyche that predisposes it to a neuroses. Yeah, I guess so. That is repeated pattern programming, right? If you are dreaming, you are in the unconscious state, directly accessing the subconscious. And so you are doing direct read write onto the subconscious binaries. And so if you are constantly dreaming, my mother's a witch, my mother's a witch, my mother's a witch, that is going to be the reality for you. Right? You will literally program yourself into that. 1. The mother complex of the son. The effects of the mother complex differ according to whether it appears in a son or a daughter. Typical effects on the son are homosexuality and Don Juanism, and sometimes also impotence. In homosexuality, the son's entire heterosexuality is tied to the mother in an unconscious form. In Don Juanism, he unconsciously seeks his mother in every woman he meets. The effects of a mother complex on the son may be seen in the ideology of Sybil and the Addis type. I get really, really nervous about the words like alls, right? This is an implying an all, right? In homosexuality, the son's entire heterosexuality is tied to the mother. And that might be true, right? There is definitely instances in which that is the case. There are instances where it is not tied to the mother at all, where it is actually tied to sexual abuse by a father or someone else. There is also the absolute truth that some people are born that way. There doesn't have to necessarily be a traumatic event to cause that. That is something that some people are just born as. That doesn't mean everybody. There is a lot of deviance. There is a lot of rebellion, and the both of those things express themselves in this way. It can be expressing that self towards the mother or the father, either one or neither. It could be just to authority in general, which is generally an expression of the masculine, yes, but still, using alls is a big thing, right? Defining an entire group of people by certain characteristics that a part of them have is a big thing. And that is something that should always be taken with extreme caution, right? Anytime the group gets too big, you're probably making the group too big. Self-castration, madness, and early death. Because of the difference in sex, a son's mother complex does not appear in pure form. This is the reason why in every masculine mother complex, side by side with the mother archetype, a significant role is played by the image of a man's sexual counterpart, the anima. The mother is the first feminine being with whom the man to be comes in contact, and she cannot help playing, overtly or covertly, consciously or unconsciously, upon the son's masculinity, just as the son in his turn grows increasingly aware of his son's femininity, or unconsciously responds to it by instinct. In the case of the son, therefore, the simple relationships of identity of resistance and differentiation are continually cut across by erotic attraction or repulsion, which complicates matters very considerably. I do not mean to say that for this reason the mother complex of a son ought to be regarded as more serious than that of a daughter. The investigation of these complex psychic phenomena is still in the pioneer stage. Comparisons will not become feasible until we have some statistics at our disposal. And of these, so far, there is no sign. Only in the daughter is the mother complex clear and uncomplicated. Here, we have to do either with an overdevelopment of feminine instincts indirectly caused by the mother, or with a weakening of them to the point of complete extinction. In the first case, the preponderance of instinct makes the daughter unconscious of her own personality. In the latter, the instincts are projected upon the mother. For the present, we must content ourselves with the statement that in the daughter, a mother complex either unduly stimulates or else inhibits the feminine instinct, and that in the son it injures the masculine instinct through an unnatural sexualization. Since a mother complex is a concept borrowed from psychopathology, it is always associated with the idea of injury and illness. But if we take the concept out of its narrow psychopathological setting and give it a wider connotation, we can see that it has a positive effects as well. Thus, a man with a mother complex may have a finely differentiated eros instead of or in addition to homosexuality. Something of this sort is suggested by Plato in his Symposium. This gives him a great capacity for friendship, which often creates ties of astonishing tenderness between men and may even rescue friendships between the sexes from the limbo of the impossible. He may have good taste and an aesthetic sense which are fostered by the presence of a feminine streak. Then he may be supremely gifted as a teacher because of his almost feminine insight and tact. He is likely to have a feeling for history and to be conservative in the best sense and cherish the values of the past. Often, he is endowed with a wealth of religious feelings, which help to bring the ecclesia spiritualis into reality, and a spiritual receptivity which makes him responsive to revelation. And see, this is one of the things that I like to emphasize, right? There is nothing wrong with expressing yourself how you feel, right? By that, I do not ever mean cutting off pieces of your body because you don't feel like they should be there. If they are cancerous, by all means, dispose of that weak tissue. But there is no reason to cut off genitalia because of your mind. If you express yourself as a man in a feminine manner, that is fine, right? That is even part of nature. That doesn't mean that you are gay. Some gay people don't express themselves in a feminine way at all. Some do, right? Those are the ones we know about, right? That's the ones that are obvious, the flamboyants. But there is no intrinsic, right? There is no only one way to be a man. There is no only one way to express masculinity, and there is no wrong way to be a man and embrace your femininity, right? There is no you're being too sensitive. There is situations where you are being too sensitive, but you have emotions for a reason and you are meant to feel them and express them in the correct environment, right? Don't break down in the middle of the street, but in a safe place, it is perfectly fine for a man to cry, to express his feminine side. Right? There is nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong if you are a feminine expressing straight man and you want to live that way. There is nothing wrong with that. Don't let anyone express to you that you are less because you do so. And the same is exactly the true for the feminine, right? If you are a masculine expressing feminine, there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean that you are gay. It doesn't mean that you are trans. It just means that you express yourself in that manner. It doesn't mean that there is something wrong with you or even that there was a trauma in your past. That is one of the problems with psychotherapy and the understanding of this writ large, right? Trying to fit everybody into the box of men should be this way, women should be this way, without taking into the account that differentiation is a thing and it expresses a need in the species. And so we should welcome the differentiation without placing judgments upon the intrinsic value of another person for the way that they express that. Now, again, that does not extend to cutting off body parts. Right? That is a problem that should be dealt with in psychotherapy. And so hopefully I was clear on what I was trying to express there. You can express yourself as either a man or a female in either masculine or feminine ways. It does not make you intrinsically bad. It does not make you gay. It does not make you trans. It does not make you anything but a feminine man or a masculine woman. And those things are perfectly fine. And there's nothing wrong with being gay. There's nothing wrong with any of that, right? I don't place judgment upon other people's sexual decisions at all. I don't know you. I don't know your motivations. And so I don't place anything upon those. All right. Back to the text. In the same way, what in its negative aspect is Don Juanism can appear positively as bold and resolute manliness, ambitious striving after the highest goals, opposition to all stupidity. Now, that one I can agree with, right? Ambitious striving after the highest goals, opposition to all stupidity. I am here for that. Not for narrow mindedness, injustice, and laziness. Like, how can you have ambitious striving after the highest goals and laziness? Willingness to make sacrifices for what is regarded as right, sometimes bordering on heroism, perseverance, inflexibility, and toughness of will, a curiosity that does not shrink, even from the riddles of the universe, and finally, a revolutionary spirit which strives to put a new face upon the world. Hear, 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 hear. All these possibilities are reflected in the mythological motifs enumerated earlier as different aspects of the mother archetype. As I have already dealt with the mother complex of the sun, including the anima complication elsewhere, and my present theme is the archetype of the mother, in the following discussion, I shall relegate masculine psychology to the background. 2. The mother complex of the daughter. Hypertrophy of the maternal element. We have noted that in the daughter, the mother complex leads either to a hypertrophy of the feminine aspect or to its atrophy. The exaggeration of the feminine side means an intensification of all female instincts, above all, the maternal instinct. The negative aspect is seen in the woman whose only goal is childbirth. To her, the husband is obviously of secondary importance. He is first and foremost the instrument of procreation, and she regards him merely as an object to be looked after, along with children, poor relations, cats, dogs, and household furniture. The correct order of importance in your life is this, and this is one of those things that I am unequivocal with. It is source, God, creator, however you choose to express that, your spouse, your children, then everything else. Even her own personality is of secondary importance. She often remains entirely unconscious of it, for her life is lived in and through others, in more or less complete identification with all the objects of her care. First, she gives birth to the children, and from then on, she clings to them, for without them, she has no existence whatsoever. And then she will bitch about the man who gave them to her because he doesn't do enough. Like Demeter, she compels the gods by her. And that's not a personal for me. That is something I see on Facebook on a daily basis. And I probably should not have inserted in here. Like Demeter, she compels the gods by her stubborn persistence to grant her the right of possession over her daughter. Her Eros develops exclusively as a maternal relationship while remaining unconscious as a personal one. An unconscious Eros always expresses itself as will to power. Women of this type, though continually living for others, are, as a matter of fact, unable to make any real sacrifice. And again, here, driven by ruthless will to power and a fanatical insistence on their own maternal rights. They often succeed in annihilating not only their own personality, but also the personal lives of their children. The less conscious such a mother is of her own personality, the greater and more violent is her unconscious will to power. For many such women, Bobo, rather than Demeter, would be the appropriate symbol. The mind is not cultivated for its own sake, but usually remains in its original condition, altogether primitive, unrelated, and ruthless, but also as true and sometimes as profound as nature herself. She herself does not know this and is therefore unable to appreciate the wittiness of her mind or to marvel philosophically at its profundity. Like as not, she will immediately forget what she has said. B. Overdevelopment of Eros. It by no means follows that the complex induced in a daughter by such a mother must necessarily result in hypertrophy of the maternal instinct. Quite the contrary, this instinct may be wiped out altogether. As a substitute, an overdeveloped Eros results, and this almost invariably leads to an unconscious, incestuous relationship with the father. The intensified Eros places an abnormal emphasis on the personality of others. Jealousy of the mother and the desire to outdo her become the leitmotifs of subsequent undertakings, which are often disastrous. A woman of this type loves romantic and sensational episodes for their own sake and is interested in married men, less for themselves than for the fact that they are married, and so give her an opportunity to wreck a marriage, that being the whole point of her maneuver. Once the goal is attained, her interest evaporates for lack of any maternal instinct, and then it will become someone else's turn. This type is noted for its remarkable unconsciousness. Such women really seem to be utterly blind to what they are doing, which is anything but advantageous, either for themselves or for their victims. I need hardly point out that for men with a passive eros, this type offers an excellent hook for anima projections. C. Identity with the mother. If a mother complex in a woman does not produce an overdeveloped eros, it leads to identification with the mother and to paralysis of the daughter's feminine initiative. A complete projection of her personality onto the mother then takes place, owing to the fact that she is unconscious both of her maternal instinct and of her eros. Everything which reminds her of motherhood, responsibility, personal relationships, and erotic demands arouses feelings of inferiority and compels her to run away to her mother, naturally, who lives to perfection everything that seems unattainable to her daughter, as a sort of superwoman, admired involuntarily by the daughter. The mother lives out for her beforehand all that the girl might have lived for herself. She is content to cling to her mother in selfless devotion, while at the same time unconsciously striving, almost against her will, to tyrannize over her, naturally under the mask of complete loyalty and devotion. Got a cousin like that. The daughter leads to shadow existence, often visibly sucked dry by her mother, and she prolongs her mother's life, a sort of continuous blood transfusion. These bloodless maidens are by no means immune to marriage. On the contrary, despite their shadowiness and passivity, they command a high price on the marriage market. First, they are so empty that a man is free to impute to them anything he fancies. In addition, they are so unconscious that the unconscious puts out countless invisible feelers, veritable octopus tentacles that suck up all masculine projections. And this pleases men enormously. All that feminine indefiniteness is the longed for counterpart of male decisiveness and single mindedness, which can be satisfactorily achieved only if a man get rid of everything doubtful, ambiguous, vague, and muddled by projecting it upon some charming example of feminine innocence. Because of the woman's characteristic passivity and the feelings of inferiority which make her continually play the injured innocent, the man finds himself cast in an attractive role. He has the privilege of putting up with the familiar feminine foibles with real superiority and yet with forbearance, like a true knight. Fortunately, he remains ignorant of the fact that these deficiencies consist largely of his own projections. The girl's notorious helplessness is a special attraction. She is so much an appendage of her mother that she can only flutter confusedly when a man approaches. She just doesn't know a thing. She is so inexperienced, so terribly in need of help, that even the gentlest swain becomes a daring abductor who brutally robs a loving mother of her daughter. Such a marvelous opportunity to pass himself off as a gay Lothario does not occur every day and therefore acts as a strong incentive. This was how Pluto abducted Persephone from the inconsolable Demeter. But by a decree of the gods, he had to surrender his wife every year to his mother in law for the summer season. The attentive reader will note that such legends do not come about by chance. Send her home. I am so lucky. Like, I cannot complain in the slightest bit about my mother in law. Like, she's passed on now. She's been gone several years, but she was the most wonderful woman. Like, she was so wonderful to me. She was wonderful to her children. There was definitely some issues that she did pass on, right? And some of them are dealing with them and some of them are not, but none of it was intentional. There was no abuse. She was a great woman. And so I'm lucky, right? I was so very lucky that I got to like both my mother in law and my father in law. D, resistance to the mother. These three extreme types are linked together by many intermediate stages, of which I shall mention only one important example. In the particular intermediate type I have in mind, the problem is less an overdevelopment or an inhibition of the feminine instincts than an overwhelming resistance to maternal supremacy, often to the exclusion of all else. It is the supreme example of the negative mother complex. The motto of this type is anything so long as it is not like mother. On the one hand, we have a fascination which never reaches the point of identification. On the other, an intensification of eros which exhausts itself in jealous resistance. This kind of daughter knows what she does not want, but is usually completely at sea as to what she would choose as her own fate. All her instincts are concentrated on the mother in the negative form of resistance and are therefore of no use to her in building her own life. Should she get as far as marrying, either the marriage will be used for the sole purpose of escaping from her mother, or else a diabolical fate will present her with a husband who shares all the essential traits of her mother's character. There is some truth in that. All instinctive processes meet with unexpected difficulties. Either sexuality does not function properly, or the children are unwanted, or maternal duties seem unbearable, or the demands of marital life are responded to with impatience and irritation. This is quite natural, since none of it has anything to do with the realities of life, when stubborn resistance to the power of the mother in every form has come to life's dominating aim. In such cases, one can often see the attributes of the mother archetype demonstrated in every detail. For example, the mother, as representative of the family or clan, causes either violent resistances or complete indifference to anything that comes under the head of family, community, society, convention, and the like. Resistance to the mother as uterus often manifests itself in menstrual disturbances, failure of conception, abhorrence of pregnancy, hemorrhages, and excessive vomiting during pregnancy, miscarriages, and so on. There is a certain amount of psychosomatic, right, that you create the circumstances, right? And so I'm sure that there is absolutely this. I don't know if it would be classified as often manifesting, but who am I to say? That's the one of the big words, right? Often is a pretty big word. The mother as materia, matter, may be at the back of these women's impatient with objects. They're clumsy, handling of tools and crockery, and bad taste in clothes. Again, resistance to the mother can sometimes result in a spontaneous development of intellect for the purpose of creating a sphere of interest in which the mother has no place. This development springs from a daughter's own needs, and not at all for the sake of a man whom she would like to impress or dazzle by a semblance of intellectual comradeship. Its real purpose is to break the mother's power by intellectual criticism and superior knowledge, so as to enumerate to her all her stupidities, mistakes in logic, and educational shortcomings. Intellectual development is often accompanied by the emergence of masculine traits in general. Part 4, Aspects of the Mother Complex. Bloodless Maidens. That would be a great band name. Indeed. The Bloodless Maidens. The positive aspect of the first type of the complex, namely the overdevelopment of the maternal instinct, is identical with that well known image of the mother which has been glorified in all ages and all tongues. This is the mother love, which is one of the most moving and unforgettable memories of our lives, the mysterious root of all growth and change. The love that means homecoming, shelter, and the long silence from which everything begins and in which everything ends. Intimately known and yet strange, like nature, lovingly tender and yet cruel, like fate, joyous and untiring giver of life, Mater Dolorosa, and mute, implacable portal that closes upon the dead. Mother is mother love, my experience and my secret. Why risk saying too much that is false and inadequate and beside the point, about that human being who was our mother, the accidental carrier of that great experience which includes herself and myself and all mankind? And indeed, the whole of created nature, the experience of life whose children we are. The attempt to say these things has always been made and probably always will be, but a sensitive person cannot, in all fairness, load that enormous burden of meaning, responsibility, duty, heaven and hell, on the shoulders of one frail and fallible human being, so deserving of love, indulgence, understanding, and forgiveness, who was our mother. He knows that the mother carries for us that inborn image of the mater natura and mater spiritualis, of the totality of life in which we are a small and helpless part. Nor should we hesitate for one moment to relieve the human mother of this appalling burden, for our own sakes as well as hers. It is just this massive weight of meaning that ties us to the mother and chains her to her child, to the physical and mental detriment of both. A mother complex is not got rid of by blindly reducing the mother to human proportions. Besides that, we run the risk of dissolving the experience, mother, into atoms, thus destroying something supremely valuable and throwing away the golden key which a good fairy laid in our cradle. That is why mankind has always instinctively added the pre existent divine pair to the personal parents, the godfather and godmother of the newborn child, so that from sheer unconsciousness or short sighted rationalism, he should never forget himself so far as to invest his own parents with divinity. The archetype is really far less scientific problem than an urgent question of psychic hygiene, even if all proofs of the existence of archetype were lacking, and all the clever people in the world succeeded in convincing us that such a thing could not possibly exist. We would have to invent them forthwith in order to keep our highest and most important values from disappearing into the unconscious. For when these fall into the unconscious, the whole elemental force of the original experience is lost. What then appears in its place is fixation on the mother imago. And when this has been sufficiently rationalized and corrected, we are tied fast to human reason and condemned from then on to believe exclusively in what is rational. That is a virtue and an advantage on the one hand, but on the other, a limitation and impoverishment, for it brings us nearer to the bleakness of doctrinarianism and enlightenment. This désaisonnement emits a deceptive light which illuminates only what we know already, but spreads a darkness over all those things which it would be most needful for us to know and become conscious of. The more independent reason pretends to be, the more it turns into sheer intellectuality, and which puts doctrine in the place of reality and shows us man is not as he is, but how it wants him to be, whether he understands them or not. Men must remain conscious of the world of archetypes, because in it he is still a part of nature and is connected with his own roots. A view of the world or social order that cuts him off from the primordial images of life is not only is no culture at all, but in increasing degree is a prison or stable. If the primordial images remain conscious in some form or other, the energy that belongs to them can flow freely into man. But when it is no longer possible to maintain contact with them, then the tremendous sum of energy stored up in these images, which is also the source of the fascination underlying the infantile parental complex, falls back into the unconscious. The unconscious then becomes charged with a force that acts as an irresistible visa terrego to whatever view or idea or tendency our intellect may choose to dangle enticingly before our desiring eyes. In this way, man is delivered over to his conscious side, and reason becomes the arbiter of right and wrong, of good and evil. I am far from wishing to belittle the divine gift of reason, man's highest faculty. But in the role of absolute tyrant, it has no meaning, no more than light would have in a world where its counterpart, darkness, was absent. Man would do well to heed the wise counsel of the mother and obey the inexorable law of nature, which sets limits to every being. He ought never to forget that the world exists only because opposing forces are held in equilibrium. So, too, the rational is counterbalanced by the irrational, and what is planned and purposed by what is. This excursion into the realm of generalities was unavoidable. The mother is the first world of the child and the last world of the adult. We are all wrapped in her as her children in the mantle of the great Isis. But let us now return to the different types of feminine mother complex. It may seem strange that I am devoting so much more time to the mother complex in woman than to its counterpart in man. The reason for this has already been mentioned. In a man, the mother complex is never pure. It is always mixed with animal archetypes, and the consequence is that a man's statements about the mother are always emotionally prejudiced in the sense of showing animosity. Only in women is it possible to examine the effects of the mother archetype without admixture of animosity, and even this has prospects of success only when no compensating animus has developed. 2. The overdeveloped eros. I drew a very unfavorable picture of this type as we encountered it in the field of psychopathology. But this type, inviting as it appears, also has positive aspects which society could ill afford to do without. Indeed, what is possibly the worst effect of this attitude, the unscrupulous wrecking of marriages, we can see an extremely significant and purposeful arrangement of nature. This type often develops in reaction to a mother who is wholly a thrall of nature, purely instinctive, and therefore all devouring. Such a mother is an anachronism, a throwback to a primitive state of matriarchy where the man leads an insipid existence as a mere procreator and serf of the soil. The reactive intensification of the daughter's eros is aimed at some man who ought to be rescued from the preponderance of the female maternal element in his life. A woman of this type instinctively intervenes when provoked by the unconsciousness of the marriage partner. She will disturb that comfortable ease so dangerous to the personality of a man, but frequently regarded by him as marital faithfulness. This complacency leads to blank unconsciousness of his own personality and to those supposedly ideal marriages where he is nothing but a dad and she is nothing but mom, and they even call each other that. This is a slippery path that can easily degrade marriage to the level of mere breed pen. I really had like I don't like when people call their spouse daddy or mommy. That's a little bit weird to me. A woman of this type, and I'm not one to judge normally, but that one's weird. A woman of this type directs the burning ray of her eros upon a man whose life is stifled by maternal solicitude. And by doing so, she arouses a moral conflict. And I think the reason why, right, the reason why I have a problem with it is I don't know that I've ever met a single person who called her spouse daddy that he didn't beat on her. I don't know that I've ever met a single person where that was an instance. Yet, without this, there can be no consciousness of personality. But why on earth, you may ask, should it be necessary for a man to achieve by hook or by crook a higher level of consciousness? This is truly the crucial question, and I do not find the answer easy. Instead of a real answer, I can only make a confession of faith. I believe that after thousands and millions of years, someone had to realize that this wonderful world of mountains and oceans, suns and moons, galaxies and nebulae, plants and animals exists. From a low hill in the Athai plains of East Africa, I once watched the vast herds of wild animals grazing in soundless stillness, as they had done from time immemorial, touched only by the breath of a primeval world. I felt then as if I were the first man, the first creature, to know that all this is. The entire world around me was still in its primeval state. It did not know what it was. I try to do that intentionally, right? When we go to the beach or to the forest, for instance, I try to put myself into a frame of mind like, what would this be like if you walked upon it and had no idea what you were about to see, right? If you didn't know what the ocean was and you were just wandering and you came across it, what would it feel like to look at the expanse of this water as far as you can see that you cannot drink? How overwhelming, how overpowering would that experience be? Or to walk up over a cliff and see for the first time the view of, distance. That would have to be an overpowering thing. Anyway, and then in that one moment in which I came to know the world sprang into being. Without that moment, it would never have been. All nature seeks this goal and finds it fulfilled in man, but only in the most highly developed and most fully conscious man. Every advance, even the smallest, along this path of conscious realization, adds that much to the world. There is no consciousness without discrimination of opposites. I agree. This is the paternal principle, the logos, which eternally struggles to extricate itself from the primal warmth and primal darkness of the maternal womb. Struggle is a big word. In a word, the unconsciousness. Divine curiosity yearns to be born and does not shrink from conflict, suffering, or sin. Unconsciousness is the primal sin, evil itself, for the Logos. Therefore, its first creative act of liberation is matricide, and the spirit that dared all heights and all depths must, as Synesius says, suffer the divine punishment, enchainment on the rocks of the Caucasus. Nothing can exist without its opposite. The two were one in the beginning and will be one again in the end. Consciousness can only exist through continual recognition of the unconsciousness, just as everything that lives must pass through many deaths. The stirring up of conflict is a Luciferian virtue in the true sense of the word. Conflict engenders fire, the fire of affects and emotions, and like every other fire, it has two aspects, that of combustion and that of creating light. It, it is simultaneously both material and spiritual, much like water. On the other one hand, emotion is the alchemical fire whose warmth brings everything into existence and whose heat burns all superfluities to ashes. Omnis superfluits cannabit. But on the other hand, emotion is the moment when steel meets flint and spark is struck forth. For emotion is the chief source of consciousness. There is no change from darkness to light or from inertia to movement without emotion. The woman, whose fate it is to be a disturbing element, is not solely destructive, except in pathological cases. Normally, the disturber is herself caught in the disturbance. The worker of change is herself changed, and the glare of the fire she ignites both illuminates and enlightens all the victims of the entanglement. What seemed a senseless upheaval becomes a process of purification, almost as if she was acting in the masculine aspect, in the change agent when she was doing that. And the masculine agent is what? Fire. What does fire do? Fire purifies. So that all is in vain might dwindle and wane. If a woman of this type remains unconscious of the meaning of her function, if she does not know that she is part of that power which would ever work evil but engenders good, she will herself perish by the sword she brings, but consciousness transforms her into a deliverer and redeemer. 3. The nothing but daughter. The woman of the third type, who is identified with the mother, that her own instincts are, who is so identified with the mother, that her own instincts are paralyzed through projection, need not on that account remain a hopeless nonentity forever. On the contrary, if she is at all normal, there is a good chance of the empty vessel being filled by a potent anima projection. Indeed, the fate of such a woman depends on this eventuality. She can never find herself at all, not even approximately, without a man's help. She has to be literally abducted or stolen from her mother. Moreover, she must play the role mapped out for her for a long time and with great effort until she actually comes to loathe it. In this way, she may perhaps discover who she really is. Such women may become devoted and self sacrificing wives of husbands whose whole existence turns on their identification with a profession or a great talent, but who, for the rest, are unconscious and remain so. Since they are nothing but masks themselves, the wives, too, must be able to play the accompanying part with a semblance of naturalness. But these women sometimes have valuable gifts which remain undeveloped only because they were entirely unconscious of their own personality. They may project a gift or talent upon a husband who lacks it himself, and then we have the spectacle of a totally insignificant man who seemed to have no chance whatsoever, suddenly soaring as if on a magic carpet to the highest summits of achievement. Cherchez les femmes, and you have the secret of his success. These women remind me, if I may be forgiven the impolite comparison, of hefty great bitches who turn tail before the smallest cur simply because he is a terrible male and it never occurs to bite him. That would be my dog. They are going to run from you. They are not going to attack you. Finally, it should be remarked that emptiness is a great feminine secret. It is something absolutely alien to man. The chasm, the unplumbed depth, the yin, the pitifulness of this vacuous nonentity goes to his heart. I speak here as a man, and one is tempted to say that this constitutes the whole mystery of woman. Such a female is fate itself. A man may say what he likes about it, be for it or against it, or both at once. In the end, he falls absurdly happy into this pit, or if he doesn't, he has missed and bungled his only chance of making a man of himself. In the first case, one cannot disprove his foolish good luck to him, and in the second, one cannot make his misfortune seem plausible. The mothers, how eerily it sounds. With a sigh which seals the capitulation of the male as he approaches the realm of the mothers, we will turn to the fourth type. 4. The negative mother complex. As a pathological phenomena, this type is an unpleasant, exacting, and anything but satisfactory partner for her husband, since she rebels in every fiber of her being against everything that springs from natural soil. However, there is no reason why increasing experience of life should not teach her a thing or two, so that, for a start, she gives up fighting the mother in the personal and restricted sense. But, even at her best, She will remain hostile to all that is dark, unclear, and ambiguous, and will cultivate and emphasize everything certain and clear and reasonable, excelling her more feminine sister in her objectivity and coolness of judgment. She may become the friend, sister, and competent advisor of her husband. Her own masculine aspirations make it possible for her to have a human understanding of the individuality of her husband, quite transcending the realm of the erotic. The woman with this type of mother complex probably has the best chance of all to make her marriage an outstanding success during the second half of life. But this is true only if she succeeds in overcoming the hell of nothing but femininity, the chaos of the maternal womb, which is her greatest danger because of her negative complex. As we know, a complex can be really overcome only if it is lived out to the full. In other words, if we are developed further, we have to draw to us and drink down the very dregs what, because of our complexes, we have held at a distance. There is a great deal of truth in that as well. There's a saying that goes, you can't leave home until you return to it, right? You go on a journey and you're like, I love this place. I want to stay here. You can't really leave home until you go back home, right? You have to go home and really decide, is this really what I want? Is this really how I want to change my life? Do I want to displace all of the familiar things with the new thing, right? You can't really leave until you go home and experience it. And this is the same concept. Until you go through the experience, like this is one of the problems with, you see an awful lot. People in the church will give their testimony when they have not really been through any trials, right? They will talk about temptation, but they've never actually succumbed to the temptation. They've never actually really had to dig in their heels and fight themselves to drag an addiction out of themselves, right? They never really had to do that, but they say it, right? It's the same thing. Nobody understands the overcoming like the one that actually went through it. But until you get to that rock bottom, right, the dregs, you're not going to get over it. And you're going to continue in it until you are done with it. And then once you are done with it, you can finally be done with it. Thanks, brother. Have a blessed day. This type started out in the world with averted face, like Lot's wife, looking back on Sodom and Gomorrah. And all the while, the world and life passed by her like a dream, an annoying source of illusions, disappointments, and irritations, all of which are due solely to the fact that she cannot bring herself to look straight ahead for once. Because of her merely unconscious, reactive attitude towards reality, her life actually becomes dominated by what she fought hardest against, the exclusively maternal feminine aspect. But if she should later turn her face, she will see the world for the first time, so to speak, in the light of maturity, and see it embellished with all the colors and enchanting wonders of youth, and sometimes even of childhood. It is a vision that brings knowledge and discovery of truth, the indispensable prerequisite for consciousness. A part of life was lost, but the meaning of life has been salvaged for her. The woman who fights against her father still has the possibility of leading an instinctive, feminine existence because she rejects only what is alien to her. But when she fights against the mother, she may, at the risk of injury to her instincts, attain to greater consciousness because in repudiating the mother, she repudiates all that is obscure, instinctive, ambiguous, and unconscious in her own nature. Thanks to her lucidity, objectivity, and masculinity, a woman of this type is frequently found in important positions in which her tardily discovered maternal quality, guided by a cool intelligence, exerts a most beneficial influence. This rare combination of womanliness and masculine understanding proves valuable in the realm of intimate relationships as well as in practical matters. As the spiritual guide and advisor of a man, such a woman, unknown to the world, may play a highly influential part. Owing to her qualities, the masculine mind finds this type easier to understand than women with other forms of mother complex. And for this reason, men often favor her with projection of positive mother complexes. The excessively feminine woman terrifies men who have a mother complex characterized by great sensitivity. But this woman is not frightening to a man because She builds bridges for the masculine mind over what he can safely guide his feelings to the opposite shore. Her clarity of understanding inspires him with confidence, a factor not to be underrated, and one that is absent from the relationship between a man and a woman much more often than one might think. The man's eros does not lead upward, but downward into that uncanny dark world of Hecate and Kali, which is a horror to any intellectual man. The understanding possessed by this type of woman will be a guiding star to him in the darkness and seemingly unending mazes of life. 5. Conclusion. From what has been said, it should be clear that in the last analysis, all the statements of mythology on this subject, as well as the observed effects of the mother complex, when stripped of their confusing detail, point to the unconscious as their place of origin. I would actually probably go lower, right? It would probably be all the way into the it would probably be all the way into the subconscious. How else could it have occurred to a man to divide the cosmos on the analogy of day and night, summer and winter? Yeah, that would be the subconscious, right? The binary is the subconscious. On the analogy of day and night, summer and winter, in a bright day world and a dark night world, peopled with fabulous monsters, unless he had the prototype of such a division in himself, and the polarity between the conscious and the invisible and unknowable unconscious. Primitive man's perception of objects is conditioned only partly by the objective behavior of the things themselves, whereas a much greater part is often played by the intrinsic facts, which are not related to the external objects except by way of projection. This is due to the simple fact that the primitive has not yet experienced that ascetic discipline of mind known to us as the critique of knowledge. To him, the world is more or less fluid phenomenon within the stream of his own fantasy, where subject and object are undifferentiated and in a state of mutual interpenetration. All that is outside also is inside, we would say with Goethe. But this inside, which modern rationalism is so eager to derive from outside, has an a priori structure of its own that antedates all conscious experience. It is quite impossible to conceive how experience, in the widest sense, or for that matter, anything psychic, could originate exclusively in the outside world. The psyche is part of the inmost mystery of life, and it has its own peculiar structure and form like every other organism. Whether this psychic structure and its elements, the archetypes, ever originated at all is a metaphysical question and therefore unanswerable. The structure is something given, the precondition that is found to be present in every case. And this is the mother, the matrix, the form into which all experience is poured. The father, on the other hand, represents the dynamism of the archetype, for the archetype consists of both form and energy. That is the binary, right? Matter and soul, matter and spirit. That is the binary. That is both form and energy. The carrier of the archetype is, in the first place, the personal mother, because the child lives at first in complete participation with her, in a state of unconscious identity. She is the psychic as well as the physical precondition of the child. With the awakening of the ego consciousness, the participation gradually weakens and consciousness begins to enter into opposition to the unconscious, its own precondition. This leads to differentiation of the ego from the mother, whose personal peculiarities gradually become more distinct. All the fabulous and mysterious qualities attaching to her image begin to fall away and are transferred to the person closest to her. For instance, the grandmother. As the mother of the mother, she is greater than the latter, and she is in truth the grand or great mother. Not infrequently, she assumes these attributes of wisdom, as well as those of a witch. For the further the archetype recedes from consciousness and the clearer the latter becomes, the more distinctly does the archetype assume mythological features. The transition from mother to grandmother means that the archetype is elevated to a higher rank. This is clearly demonstrated in a notion held by the Bataks. The funeral sacrifice in honor of a dead father is modest, consisting of ordinary food. But if the son has a son of his own, then the father has become a grandfather and has consequently attained a more dignified status in the beyond. And very important offerings are made to him. As the distance between consciousness and unconsciousness increases, the grandmother's more exalted rank transforms her into a great mother. And it frequently happens that the opposites contained in this image split apart. We then get a good fairy and a wicked fairy, or a benevolent goddess and one who is malevolent and dangerous. In Western antiquity, and especially in Eastern cultures, the opposites often remain united in the same figure, though this paradox does not disturb the primitive mind in the least. The legends about the gods are as full of contradictions as are their moral characters. In the West, the paradoxical behavior and moral ambivalence of the gods scandalized people, even in antiquity, and gave rise to criticism that led, finally, to a devaluation of the Olympians on the one hand and to their philosophical interpretation on the other. The clearest expression of this is the Christian reformation of the Jewish concept of the deity. The morally ambiguous Yahweh became an exclusively good God. Yahweh was not morally ambiguous. Yahweh was actively evil. Wow, everything evil was united in the devil. It seems as if the development of the feeling function in Western man forced a choice on him, which led to the moral splitting of the divinity into two halves. In the East, the predominantly intuitive intellectual attitude left no room for feeling values, and the gods, Kali is the case in point, should retain their original paradoxical morality undisturbed. Thus, Kali is representative of the East and the Madonna of the West. The latter has entirely lost the shadow that still distantly followed her in the allegories of the Middle Ages. It was relegated to the hell of popular imagination, where it now leads an insignificant existence as the devil's grandmother. Thanks to the development of feeling values, the splendor of the light god has been enhanced beyond measure. But the darkness, supposedly represented by the devil, has localized itself in man. This strange development was precipitated chiefly by the fact that Christianity, terrified of Manichaean dualism, strove to preserve its monotheism by main force. But since the reality of darkness and evil could not be denied, there was no alternative to make man responsible for it. Even the devil was largely, if not entirely, abolished, with the result that this metaphysical figure, who at one time was an integral part of the deity, was interjected into man, and thereupon became the real carrier of the mysterium iniquitas, omni bonum et deo, omni malum ab homine. In recent times, this development has suffered a diabolical reverse, and the wolf in sheep's clothing now goes about whispering in our ear that evil is really nothing but a misunderstanding of good and an effective instrument of progress. We think that the world of darkness has thus been abolished for good and all, and nobody realizes what a poisoning this is of man's soul. In this way, he turns himself into the devil, for the devil is half of the archetype whose irresistible power makes even unbelievers ejaculate, "Oh God," on every suitable and unsuitable occasion. My mind is just too childish sometimes. If one can possibly avoid it, one ought never to identify with an archetype, for, as psychopathology and certain contemporary events show, the consequences are terrifying. Western man has sunk to such a low level spiritually that he even has to deny the apotheosis of untamed and untamable psychic power, the divinity itself, so that, after swallowing evil, he may possess himself of the good as well. If you read Nietzsche's Zarathustra with attention and psychological understanding, you will see that he is described with rare consistency and the passion of a truly religious person, the psychology of the Superman, for whom God is dead and who is himself burst asunder because he tried to imprison the divine paradox within the narrow framework of the mortal man. We have read the entirety of Thus Spake Zarathustra. If you are interested, it is definitely worth reading, although Nietzsche had some problems. Goethe has wisely said, What terror then Sal seized the Superman, and he was rewarded with a supercilious smile from the Philistines. His gloss of a glorification of the mother, who is great enough to include in herself both the Queen of Heaven and Maria Egyptica, is supreme wisdom and profoundly significant for anyone willing to reflect upon it. But what can one expect in an age when the official spokesman of Christianity publicly announced their inability to understand the foundations of religious experience? I extract the following sentence from an article by a Protestant theologian. We understand ourselves, whether naturalistically or idealistically, to be homogeneous creatures who are not so peculiarly divided with alien forces can intervene in our inner life, as the New Testament supposes. Italics mine. It's not an alien force. The author is evidently unacquainted with the fact that science demonstrated the lability and dissociability of consciousness more than half a century ago and proved it by experiment. Yeah, people who are disassociated are attached to source, right? You are attached to source, but you have a type of amnesia that keeps you from accessing that. What is happening with dissociation and those type of things is that the unconscious is breaking through in a way, or the subconscious even is breaking through the unconscious into the consciousness in a way that you just cannot interpret, right? It's almost as if there are different users on Windows, and it's like you are getting into an account that's not yours. And you are not doing so willingly, but it is imposing itself upon you like a virus. Pop ups for those of you my age that remember those things. Our conscious intentions are continually disturbed and thwarted to a greater or lesser degree by unconscious intrusions whose causes are at first strange to us. The psyche is far from being a homogeneous unit. On the contrary, it is a boiling cauldron of contradictory impulses, inhibitions, and effects. And for many people, the conflict between them is so insupportable that they even wish for the deliverance preached by the theologians. Deliverance from what? Obviously, from a highly questionable psychic state. The unity of consciousness, or of the so called personality, is not a reality at all, but a desideratum. I still have a vivid memory of a certain philosopher who also raved about this unity and used to consult me about his neuroses. He was obsessed by the idea that he was suffering from cancer. I do not know how many specialists he had consulted already and how many x ray pictures he had made. They all assured him that he had no cancer. He himself told me, I know I have no cancer, but I still could have one. Who is responsible for this imaginary idea? He certainly did not make it for himself. It was forced upon him by an alien power. That is not true, right? That is almost certainly that he had some instance that triggered that response in him, even if it is an unconscious trigger, right? Somebody had a cancer at some point that fully terrified him. Then he had a triggering event of being reminded of a cancer or the possibility of a cancer, and that triggered a neuroses of those two forces colliding. That is not an alien power. That is an unconscious understanding that you retain. And I'm not saying that that's every instance, right? But that is a possibility. Both of those do not imply an alien power at all. And yes, you do hear voices, right? That's what this is talking about overall. There is a voice of positivity and there is a voice of negativity. There is a voice of stasis and a voice of change. And you get to listen to which one to do. It varies which one is right and any particular point. Sometimes it's good to stay the same. Sometimes it's good to change. It is never good to listen to a voice that is telling you to kill someone. And there is a difference in those voices you hear every single day, right? You have a responsibility. You need to wash some clothes, right? And you hear a voice in your head saying, you need to wash them clothes. And then you hear another voice in your head saying, you can wait a little while. And you hear those voices, whether or not you cognitively realize that you are hearing them, and you make a decision as the deciding agent which one of those voices you're going to listen to. Are you going to get up and do your laundry, or are you going to wait? Either one could be valid according to the circumstance that is. Neither one is intrinsically good or evil, but they contain change or stasis. And so it's not necessarily an alien power. And I believe that those voices is the source. It is the divine giving you the option, right? You can do this or you can do that, and you get to choose for your experience which one you are going to do. There is little to choose between this state and that of a man possessed in the New Testament. Now, whether you believe in a demon of the air or in a factor in the unconscious that plays diabolical tricks on you is all in one to me. I agree. The fact that man's imagined unity is menaced by alien powers remains the same in either case. Theologians would do better to take account for once of these psychological facts than to go on demythologizing them, mythologizing them with rationalistic explanations that are 100 years behind the times. I have tried in the foregoing to give a survey of the psychic phenomenon that may be attributed to the predominance of the mother image. Although I have not always drawn attention to them, my reader will presumably have had no difficulty in recognizing those figures which characterize the Great Mother mythologically, even when they appear under the guise of personalistic psychology. When we ask patients who are particularly influenced by the mother image to express in words or pictures what mother means to them, be it positive or negative, we invariably get symbolical figures, which must be regarded as direct analogies of mythological mother image. These analogies take us into a field that still requires a great deal more work of elucidation. At any rate, I personally do not feel able to say anything definitive about it. Nevertheless, I venture to offer a few suggestions. They should be regarded as altogether provisional and tentative. Above all, I should like to point out that the mother image in man's psychology is entirely different in character from a woman's. For a woman, the mother typifies her own conscious life as conditioned by her sex, but for a man, the mother typifies something alien, which he has yet to experience and which is filled with the imagery latent in the unconscious. For this reason, if for no other, the mother image of a man is essentially different from a woman's. The mother has from the outside a decidedly symbolical significance for a man, which probably accounts for his strong tendency to idealize her. Idealization is a hidden apotrop- apotropism. I don't know that word. One idealizes whenever there is a secret fear to be exercised. Apotropism. I'm going to leave it. What is feared in the unconscious and its magical influence. Whereas for a man, the mother is ipso facto symbolical. For a woman, she becomes a symbol only in the course of her psychological development. Experience reveals the striking fact that the Urania type of mother image predominates in masculine psychology, whereas in a woman, the chthonic type, or earth mother, is the most frequent. During the manifest phase of the archetype, an almost complete identification takes place. A woman can identify directly with the Earth Mother, but a man cannot, except in psychotic cases. A mythology shows one of the peculiarities of the Earth Mother is that she frequently appears paired with her male counterpart. Accordingly, the man identifies with the Sun Lover, on whom the grace of Sophia has descended, with a pure Eternus or a Filius Sapentae. But the companion of the chthonic mother is the exact opposite, an Iptophallic Hermes, an Egyptian Bes or a Lingam. In India, this symbol of the highest spiritual significance, and in the West, Hermes is one of the most contradictory figures of Hellenistic syncretism, which was the source of extremely important spiritual developments in Western civilization. He is also the god of revelation, and in the unofficial nature philosophy of the early Middle Ages, he is nothing less than the world creating nous itself. The mystery has perhaps found its finest expression in the words of the Tabula Smagardina, omnis superius sicut inferius. As it is above, so it is below. It is a psychological fact that as soon as we touch on these identifications, we enter the realm of syzygies, the paired opposites, where the one is never separated from the other. Its antithesis. It is a field of personal experience which leads directly to the experience of individuation, the attainment of the self. A vast number of symbols for this process could be mustered from the medieval literature of the West, and even more from the storehouses of Oriental wisdom. But in this matter, words and ideas count for little. Indeed, they may become dangerous bypaths and false trails. In this still very obscure field of psychological experience, we are in direct contact, so to speak, with the archetype. Its psychic power is felt in full force. This realm is so entirely one of immediate experience that it cannot be captured by any formula, but can only be hinted at to one who already knows. He would need no explanations to understand what was the tension of opposites expressed by Apuleius in his magnificent prayer to the Queen of Heaven, when he associates heavenly Venus with Proserpina, whose strike is terraced in midnight ululations. It was the terrifying paradox of the primordial mother image. When, in 1938, I originally wrote this paper, I naturally did not know that 12 years later, the Christian version of the mother archetype would be elevated to the rank of a dogmatic truth. The Christian Queen of Heaven has obviously shed all her Olympian qualities except for her brightness, goodness, and eternality, and even her human body, the thing most prone to gross material corruption, has put on an ethereal incorruptibility. The richly varied allegories of the Mother of God have nevertheless retained some connection with her pagan prefigurations in Isis, Io, and Simile. Not only are Isis and the Horus Child iconological exemplars, but the ascension of Semele, the originally mortal mother of Dionysus, likewise anticipates the assumption of the Blessed Virgin. Further, the son of Semele is dying and resurgent god and the youngest of the Olympians. Semele herself seems to have been an earth goddess, just as the Virgin Mary is the earth from which Christ was born. This being so, the question naturally arises for the psychologist: what has become of the characteristic relation of the mother image to the earth? Darkness, the abysmal side of bodily man with his animal passions and instinctual nature, and to matter in general? The declaration of the dogma comes at a time when the achievements of science and technology, combined with a rationalistic and materialistic view of the world, threaten the spiritual and psychic heritage of man with an instant annihilation. Humanity is arming itself in dread and fascinated horror for a stupendous crime. Circumstances might easily arise when the hydrogen bomb would have to be used and the unthinkably frightful deed become unavoidable in the legitimate self defense. In striking contrast to this disastrous turn of events, the Mother of God is now enthroned in heaven. Indeed, her assumption has actually been interpreted as a deliberate counterstroke to the materialistic doctrinarianism that provoked the chthonic powers into revolt. Just as Christ's appearance in his own day created a real devil, an adversary of God, out of what was originally a son of God dwelling in heaven, so now, conversely, a heavenly figure is split off from her original chthonic realm and taken up a counter position to the titanic forces of the earth and the underworld that have been unleashed. In the same way that the Mother of God was divested of all the essential qualities of materiality, matter became completely desouled. And this at a time when physics is pushing forward to insights, which, if they do not exactly dematerialize matter, at least endue it with properties of its own, and make its relation to the psyche a problem that can no longer be shelved. For just as the tremendous advancement of science led at first to a premature dethronement of mind and to an equally ill considered deification of matter, so it is the same urge for scientific knowledge that is now attempting to bridge the huge gulf that has opened out between the two Weltanschauungen. The psychologist inclines to see in the dogma of the assumption a symbol, which, in a sense, anticipates this whole development. For him, the relationship to the earth and to matter is one of the inalienable qualities of the mother archetype, so that when a figure that is conditioned by this archetype is represented as having been taken up into heaven, the realm of the spirit, this indicates a union of earth and heaven, or of matter and spirit. The approach of natural science will almost certainly be from the other direction. It will see in matter itself the equivalent of spirit, but this spirit will appear divested of all, or at any rate, most of its known qualities, just as earthly matter was stripped of its specific characteristics when it staged its entry into heaven. Nevertheless, the way will gradually be cleared for a union of the two principles. Understood concretely, the assumption is the absolute opposite of materialism. Taken in this sense, it is a counterstroke that does nothing to diminish the tension between the opposites, but drives it to the extremes. Remember, I said there has to be an exchange of energies. Understood symbolically, however, the assumption of the body is a recognition and acknowledgement of matter, which, in the last resort, was identified with evil only because of an overwhelmingly pneumatic tendency in man. In themselves, spirit and matter are neutral, or rather, utrisku capax, that is, capable of what man calls good or evil. Although as names they are exceedingly relative, underlying them are very real opposites. They are part of the energetic structure of the physical and of the psychic world. And without them, no existence of any kind could be established. There is no position without its negation. In spite or just because of their extreme opposition, neither can exist without the other. It is exactly as formulated in classical Chinese philosophy. Yang, the light, warm, dry, masculine principle, contains within it the seed of yin, the dark, cold, moist, feminine principle, and vice versa. Matter, therefore, would contain the seed of spirit, and spirit, the seed of matter. They are both necessary. I have a whole book on that. I got 2 books on that. The long known synchronistic phenomena that have been statistically confirmed by Ryan's experiments point, to all appearances, in this direction. The psychization of matter puts the absolute immateriality of spirit in question, since this would have to be accorded a kind of substantiality. The dogma of the assumption, proclaimed in an age suffering from the greatest political schism history has ever known, is a compensating symptom that reflects the strivings of science with a uniform world picture. In a certain sense, both developments were anticipated by alchemy in the hieros gamos of opposites, but only in symbolic form. Not true. Nevertheless, the symbol has the great advantage of being able to unite heterogeneous or even incommensurable factors into a single image. With the decline of alchemy, the symbolical unity of spirit and matter fell apart, with the result that modern man finds himself uprooted and alienated in a desouled world. The actual physical dealing with the emotional things that is talked about in the Hieros Gammas of Opposites is entirely what the first 2 books are about. The alchemist saw the union of opposites under the symbol of the tree, and it is therefore not surprising that the unconscious of present day man, who no longer feels at home in his world, can base his experience neither on the past that is no more, nor on the future that is yet to be. Should hark back to the symbol of the cosmic tree, rooted in this world and growing up to heaven, the tree that is also man. It is the history of symbols. This tree is described as the way of life itself, a growing into that which eternally is and does not change, which springs from the union of opposites and by its eternal presence also makes that union possible. It seems as if it were only through an experience of symbolic reality that man, vainly seeking his own existence and making a philosophy out of it, can find his way back to a world in which he is no longer a stranger. And that is going to bring us to the end of the mother archetype, and we will be back tomorrow, 8 Central, with Concerning Rebirth. Hopefully, I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of somewhat difficult topics. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I do have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something that I apologize for. I don't feel like I need to expand here. We have discussed everything that needed to be along the way. So if you have found value, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow. Throw me a comment, whether you agree or disagree with anything that is stated. If you put it in the box and it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you've truly found value, I ask that you hit the super thanks. Consider joining for a membership, picking up a copy of one of my books, or reaching out to me through the various links provided down below. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pittstake. Peace. Thank you, Lord.